Okay, this is in a good place now. We've got all of our logic classes that I think we're going to need. We can always change our mind as we go through, but I think we're good to go, and we've made everything that we need to do in order to get our application to work. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to concentrate on the interface. Now the interface is going to be built using XAML, and XAML is the language which is used for layout. And this video may take us a little bit longer than some of the ones that we're going to do, because I need to explain the concept of XAML in some detail and WPF. But I just want to remind you what we're trying to do. So I've got a capture of the working application screen on the screen now. And what we're trying to do is make this form. So we've got a header. We've got a label which is called a text block in WPF. We've got a text box, same name as before. Label, text box, or text block and text box, text block and text box, two buttons, and a style. We've got this particular style for the header, which is bigger in text than that. Then these are all of the same, so that's good. So we can work with this and get a consistency in what we do. Our buttons are the same because they get centered text. They've got the certain size of text and so forth. A grey background. That's exactly what we want to achieve in this particular lesson. So let's talk about the concepts of WPF and XAML. XAML is a markup language, ML at the end of it, markup language. And what we do with markup languages is we lay things out. Marking up is laying out on a page. And what we do with WPF and XAML is that we use our layout as a system of containers. This is a page container, and inside this page container we're going to have what's called a stack panel. And that stack panel enables us to stack things vertically, these rows of items that we're going to include in our page. Now in which we get our stack panel, and then inside our stack panel we put what's called a grid. Now a grid is made up of rows and columns, and you can see that this one has a series of controls in rows and two columns. These two columns allow us to put something in a very precise position on the page, but it's not exactly tied to any coordinate. For example, in Windows Forms you would tie to the coordinates of the top left hand corner, and this one would start at position 1020 versus 180, something like that. No, in WPF we do things as relative positions. So we use these containers, and each container has properties. And the properties that we apply enable us to say centered, for example, text aligned left. Then we've got a margin and a bit of padding in here and so forth. So we can apply containers to our containers. We can apply property changes to our containers and our controls. Very powerful. So let's get ahead and do it. So I had some sample text on here just to make things show that we were actually on the right page. So we've now got our grid, and our grid has a margin of 5 around it. If you remember that we said that our grid was where we would lay things out, and our grid exists inside our page. But what we're going to do is we're going to apply that. You see the margin there just slightly away from the edge. So we're going to apply another thing inside our grid. Now what we're going to do is a stack panel. If you start to type stack, then when you get the IntelliSense showing up stack panel, press the tab, close the tag, and go inside that tag space. So that's really good. So we've now got our stack panel inside our grid. Now our stack panel is going to allow us to put the things that we want to see in a certain orientation. And the orientation is important because with that you can add some very complex layout styles. And for example, in this one I can start to say that on my stack panel I'm going to put a background color. So you just start to type, you see the IntelliSense picks it up, press the tab, and I'm saying corn silk, I think it is, yeah, corn silk. Look, immediately applied to the whole of the stack panel, which is occupying the whole of the grid inside the whole of the page, but our margin doesn't let it go right up to the edge. If I do a bit of, let's have a look at this really closely, we've got a margin around the control, making sure that we don't go right up to the edge, which is just good design, isn't it? I've moved it out there, sorry, that's my fault. Right, so we've now got it. So let's now do what we need to do next. So in here, I'm going to add another control, which is a grid control. Now, I'm doing this in a way that is vastly over-engineering it. I could have just done stuff straight into a grid inside the main grid of the page. I absolutely could have done. But I don't think you're going to learn about the effectiveness of making these designs work for us unless I make it a little bit more complicated than it has to be. So inside my grid, I'm going to put the rows and the columns that I need. And I worked out in my design, as I showed you, that we need 5 rows. So before we can put the rows in themselves, we have to put a container for the rows. Okay, then we put and with this one we can close it straight away. Now, one of the great things about happening when you get good at using the systems of WPF is you can start to get really good at recognizing places where you can copy and paste, and that's exactly what I can do here. And I've now got 5 rows. Let's go back to my design and let's look at this row system that we've got. If I can find the editor, there it is, my Snagit editor. This row is fatter than this row. That's absolutely true. And this row may be the same size as that row. Or is it are they all the same size? But certainly this bottom row is much fatter than the others. I'm going to do my layouts just to see how we can make these work for us. And the way in which it works inside XAML is that we say everything should represent a proportion of the screen in terms of height. So if I do height, and we use what's called a star system. So I'm saying this is going to get 2 stars. And you'll see how this all works out in a minute. And you see that the clipboard is going to be your friend in a lot of cases. And I'm going to make this one much bigger, much higher, much more height in it. So what we're saying here is that this has 2, 4, 6, 8, 13 divisions of height. And for this one I want 2, this one I want 2, but for this bottom I want 5 of those 13. And that's how we get the proportional layout that we get for the screen in terms of height. Rather than saying it has to be 150 pixels high or 200 pixels high, we're using a proportional system. So in whatever screen this form is displayed, the height of the screen will be split into 13, and this one here will always get 5 over 13 of the display. So we're going to do the same with columns. I'm using a different keyboard because it's quieter. And I think we just need 2 columns. I don't need to copy and paste because it's only 2. And I've got my 2 columns. My grid's now laid out, but why can't I see it? Well, actually, it is there. That fat line there on the top is where we're seeing the grid. Look, the columns are there, but the rows are there. Why aren't the rows there? Because they got nothing in them yet. Now, where do the controls go? We say we want to lay out our controls in a grid, so our controls must go inside that grid, and they'll go inside here. What I like to do is I like to put a comment in, which is the less than symbol, exclamation mark, dash dash, tab, 2 spaces, back 1, and I'm going to put row index 0 col span 2, and that's going to be the title. Okay, so that's how I like to do it. What I'll do is I'll do the rest of them so that you have to watch me doing that, and it gives me a cool reference for working and making sure that I don't miss anything. Okay, let's put our first control set in. And the first control that I'm going to put in is the header. Now the header is going to go inside a stack panel of its own, the title or header. And there it is. Now let's just see, you see immediately that this is updated here. So what I've done is I put a stack panel there. I've said it's going across 2 columns. It's got a margin around it like that. A text block goes inside the stack panel, and it's using that style that I told you about, the page header style, and the text is enter your details. So that's what it looks like. Now let's build one up a little bit more gradually when we come to the next one, so that you understand exactly what's going on. So the next one we're going to work with is where they entered their name. So what I'm going to do next is the name. Now I call this a control set. This is the language I use. It's not a name for it officially. And this is a control set. Age and weight is a control set A. As you can see, they kind of go together. And what I do, and it's my way of doing it, and it's once again, as I say, over engineering, is that I'm saying I put stack panels for everything, because I think the stack panels give us an option to control not just how it looks, but the positioning and all those other things that I talked about before. So we start off by putting stack tab, and then I want to close that, and I want a style to go into the stack panel itself. I want to firstly put it in the right row. You can see that it's in the same row, which is the default row 0. So I want this stack panel to go into grid row 1. So I'll put this here, grid dot row 1, and it's immediately moved down, and you may not be able to detect it on the layout of before, but it has. I want it to go across 2 columns, grid dot column span 2. So it's now going across 2 columns. I also want to make sure that I put some margining on this. Now here's another thing about margining. I started to introduce margins to you in the styles video, but we can shortcut it. If we want the top and the left and the right to be the same, I'm going to put 0, and we do. So that's going to be left and right, and top and bottom. So this will now be top and bottom. So you don't have to specify left, top, right and bottom. If the top and bottom are the same and the left and right are the same, you can put those in as a single number. So inside my stack panel, I'm going to put a text block, and there it is. I want to do that and put the text on there, which is name, I think. Name, yeah. And then for this, I want to apply one of our styles. So I'm going to call our style equals, and then we put curly braces to access the binding of the static resource. And this time I want to say static resource, and there's all the things that apply to text blocks in this particular application. So I'm going to use the single column label style, and that's now been applied. Did you see that it changed there? Right, so underneath our text block I want to put a text box, and the text box just the same. Start to type, you get the IntelliSense. Now it doesn't got anything in it, but I didn't have to do the full open tag, but I want to have a style for this. And a style I want to use here is the value text box style. That's good, so I've got that now. But what I also want to do, because we're going to get text that we need to access in code, is give it a name. And I'm going to call this person name text box. And that's it. We've created a control just like that, and everything is here that we need. The name, which is the label, and the text box is here, so that we can see what's happening in the interface design layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in the next one. I won't go through this line by line on the next one because it's a bit painful, isn't it? So I'll do that in the next one.